Your Dog's Friend is a nonprofit 501c3 whose mission is to help keep dogs out of shelters by educating and supporting their humans. We promote positive method of training and behavior modification through stress-free methods. As part of that mission, we offer free webinars like the one you're about to watch. Subjects range from dog behavior, stress-free training, and other tools to help you understand your relationship with your dog. If you like the webinar, be sure to give us a thumbs up. Click the notification bell and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll be notified when future videos are posted. Now enjoy the webinar.
Okay, let's get started. Welcome everyone to another webinar sponsored by Your Dog's Friend. Today's speaker, Jennifer Lowe Davis, will be discussing the relationship between arousal and aggression. This is something that I think is really important and that very few of us recognize or understand completely. Jennifer is certified through the Certification Council of Pet Dog Trainers, and she is the owner and head trainer at Red Dog Run Training and Behavior in Northern Virginia. Many of you may not know that Your Dog's Friend is a nonprofit and that your donations help support these webinars and our other free services. Please consider going to the homepage of our website, yourdogsfriend.org, where you will see a donation icon in the top right corner. As always, we appreciate your support. I know that we will all learn a lot from today's webinar, and it's all yours, Jennifer.
Thanks, Deborah. I want to thank Deborah and Your Dog's Friend for having me today to talk about this important topic, and thank you to Carrie for getting me all set up. So the topics of today is arousal and aggression in dogs. A little bit about me. I've been training dogs in DC for over 11 years. I opened my business in 2020 at the beginning towards the beginning of the pandemic. Before that, I had trained for over 10 years with Kissable Canine, a training company that was based in Northern Virginia. Prior to joining Kissable Canine, I was on the staff of a local rescue, and where I did intake and helped oversee their foster program. My interest in reactivity and aggression and arousal was sparked when we adopted Bryn, our mountain cur. He was anxious about any visitors that would come into the home and people on walks and other dogs on walks. He would go from 0 to 60 in a second's notice, and he actually landed a couple bites. I had no idea what I was doing, and it wasn't until we contacted a trainer and started working on his arousal that we really saw some true behavior change. So what is arousal? Arousal happens when stressful or exciting situations create physiological changes in our dogs. Arousal is not a bad thing. It is important in regulating and motivating certain behaviors, such as mobility, the pursuit of nutrition, and responses to potential harmful events or threats to survival. Physiological changes that you see during arousal is our escalation of blood pressure, increased respiration, and lessened gastrointestinal activity. That's why when we look at a dog that is stressed, we often see them panting and they're not able to eat. We see arousal all the time in play and in competition. So we need arousal to happen because a little bit of arousal really helps us and helps our dogs be able to accomplish what we want to accomplish. The challenge is when dogs are in a hyper-aroused state. So what's happening during hyper-arousal? I will preface this by saying that this is my understanding based on studies and things I've read and webinars and talks that I've attended. I'm not a scientist, and at the end of the talk, there will be a list of resources, some of which helped inform my presentation and some of which I use every day. So I definitely encourage you to check some of those sources out. But the emotional or limbic part of the brain is what responds immediately to significant threats. So what this does is it allows the dog to act quickly without having to have a ton of information, right? So it's all about survival. After that happens, the other part of the brain sends more information to help inform the response. Often that information is what if the trigger is in some sort of context to help inform the next movement. These systems are actually meant to work in partnership. The emotional system sort of needs the guidance of the rational part of your brain, and the rational part of your brain, it really helps to sort of have that emotional information feed it. So it should be working in partnership. Even though we talk about them as sort of sides of the brain or parts of the brain, they don't work in a silo. It really is sort of like a continuum, like I have here on the screen. And most dogs are somewhere along that spectrum. Where a dog is on the spectrum is based on genetics and life experiences. You know, all of us know dogs that have never or almost never reactive, right? Everything rolls off their back. They're firmly on the rational part of the spectrum. Dogs that are easily hyper-aroused tend to start off on the more emotional side of the spectrum. And so when there is a emotional response without modulation, the brain triggers the release of stress hormones. When you have consistent release of stress hormones, then you have a dog who stays in or close to hyperarousal more often than not. So what does hyperarousal look like? It's difficulty calming down and controlling themselves. Often dogs that are hyperarousal offer reactive or hypervigilant behaviors. You know, many owners aren't even aware that they have a hyperaroused dog. They think that the dog's behavior is stemming from a need for more exercise. The more exercise that the dog gets, the more over-aroused it becomes because it's practicing that behavior. This is especially true when they have an energetic breed or a really busy puppy. Hyperarousal does not have to mean aggressive. Hyperarousal can be a friendly dog that loves humans so much that they're knocking them down at the door when people come in, right? It is that arousal is that feeling of making things happen. And then that hyperarousal comes when it is just too much and not modulated. So what are some common behaviors when we're looking at hyperarousal? We have panting. We have increased respiration. So dog can increase their respiration even if they're not panting. You can see their sides moving in and out. Often ancillary behaviors are grabbing and pulling at hands, ankle snatching around pants. They often will take treats hard, tug at clothes, jump up, and sometimes it can manifest in excessive friendliness or destruction. So this is our first case study. This is Miss Panzer. She is a 1-year-old Rottweiler. She lives in a home with her littermate, a male. They've received no formal training, and she has a history of jumping up and mouthing visitors. She has a total lack of impulse control and has a hard time sort of just even displaying impulse control in her normal life. The clients in this question are looking for day training for the 2 dogs. They want somebody to come in and help during without their presence. So this is my first meeting with the female dog. So she comes in, she immediately orients to me. She jumps up, she grabs the leash. There's a lot of panting. I don't know if you can hear it. She's got some pileoerection. It's hard to see on the video. You can see there's a lot of, there's forward movement, leash grabbing, some teeth chattering, lip licking, redirecting to her owner. So the owner gets out treat, and she's trying to just get her into a sit so that she can greet me. So she's still leash grabbing. So it's a hyper aroused dog that is not problem solving, not showing, and not checking in with its owner, making a lot of decisions in a hyper aroused state. So then what do we mean by aggression when we're talking about arousal and aggression? So the definition of aggressive behavior is an intent to do harm. Aggression in dogs is often guided by an intention to adequately control or change the environment. And in that, I don't mean that they're trying to dominate or anything like that. What I mean is that a predictable environment is key to feeling safe and secure. So that's true for humans as well. If my car breaks down at a dark street that I haven't been to at night, I feel much less safe and secure than if my car breaks down a block from my house on a sunny afternoon. Why? Because the environment is predictable when I'm near my house. The environment is unpredictable when I'm in that dark street in a place that I don't know. The more unpredictable the environment, the more stress we feel, right? How much that stress impacts you is a result of genetics and life experiences. Usually aggression in dogs, when it is not hampered by hyperarousal, is expressed in both emotional and purposeful components, meaning it is goal-directed, and the dog is, even if it looks sort of a little bit out of control for us, the dog is making a purposeful decision to aggress, to achieve or retain a resource or an object or something that they want to make sure that they are in control of. So when we look at the relationship between arousal and aggression can amplify aggressive responses, and arousal can impair cognitive processes that inhibit aggression. When we're talking about arousal and aggression, we're no longer talking about that dog that knocks you down at the door to lick your face, right? These are dogs that generally have some sort of genetic predisposition for the possibility of choosing aggressive behavior and have or may choose aggression as a mode of communication. The challenge with hyperaroused dogs is that there's little to no rational thought modulating that decision to aggress. Because arousal acts to strengthen appropriate responses, aggression sometimes is an appropriate response, right? When the dog chooses aggression, the response is outsized. So it's not merely a correction to another dog because they didn't like the fact that they were sniffing them too long. It ends up being a dog fight, right? When arousal is too high, it can cloud the dog's ability to problem solve and think rationally. Aggression is expensive calorically. Aggression isn't something that they want to choose out of their back pocket, just like we don't choose it as a first method of communication. We have other social mores that we choose before and in place of aggression. They can as well. But this is how you end up with a dog that's so stressed at a trigger in the distance that they redirect to their owner, or a dog that is so stressed by a strange person coming into their house that they decide to charge forward and aggress or try to bite that person instead of choosing better options such as leaving the room. Dogs that have lived this way for a long time sometimes don't know that there are other options or don't remember that there are other options. And so this is where we step in and help them. So here are some strategies for dealing with dogs with hyperarousal and aggression. I'm going to sort of talk through each one quickly, and then I'll sort of delve into a little bit more of the topics and show some videos. So first, you want to avoid and prevent. I always want to prevent opportunities for practicing this behavior. Manage and enrich. Establish tools to be able to manage in the moment. I see that the behavior is happening and I want to step in and help the dog out. I also want to begin enrichment activities so that the dog can learn to problem solve. This is where we also begin to work on foundational behaviors so that the dogs have some skill sets we can depend on later. Thirdly, behavior modification. You can almost never completely control your environment. In a lot of cases, or I should say in some cases, management is what's needed. We can, a dog moves to a different location, or the people move, or somebody moves out of the house. Sometimes it just makes it a little bit easier to manage the dog. But when we want to see true behavior change, we have to modify the behavior. I want to teach the dog how to make better decisions because they don't have the capacity to do so, or that capacity has been lost or is difficult. Fourthly, impulse control. Yes, we have started working on impulse control during the management and enrichment phase, but this is generally where I'm adding in specific impulse control exercises to really get the dog working and learning more about how to control themselves. And then proof for real life. How does all of this sort of work in daily life? So some considerations, food. So if you're here, you're probably accustomed to feeding your dog good treats. At this point, I'm rewarding the behaviors that I'm either asking for or I see 100% of the time. We really want to use food to change the dog's mind on how life is rewardable. Food puzzles are an important tool for helping dogs learn problem solving and impulse control independently. Leashes. I only work on 6-foot nylon or leather leashes. Muzzles. Think if a dog has had a history of aggression, especially sort of redirecting to its owner or being unsafe. I'm a big fan of conditioning to a muzzle. My preferred muzzle is an Italian basket muzzle because they can eat, drink, and pant. Head halters. For dogs that are larger than 50 pounds, a lot of times if we're having a lot of redirection or over-arousal on a leash, I will recommend a head halter because it just helps with a little bit more control and the movement forward as we're working. Clicker. I love clickers. I think that they are such an amazing communication tool to provide salient information to our dogs. And even though I don't use them for every client, I almost always use them for dogs that have arousal or hyperarousal, I should say, because I really want to be able to cut into that, cut into all of the stuff that's going on in their brain and be able to reinforce the behaviors that I want to reinforce. And then lastly, data. It's really important to take data on your dog. So in terms of prognosis, when I'm meeting with a client, I'm always looking at how long the dog has been performing the behaviors, the intensity of the behaviors, the environment, and the ability of the owners to comply. Other data is looking at what are their triggers and what is the intensity or variability. How controllable is the environment in which we're working or they expect to be working. We really have to become experts at our own dog's behavior. So prevention. Quickly, I want to eliminate or reduce leash walks temporarily. I know that a lot of us have young, active dogs that we want to get out and exercise, or we feel need exercise. I get it. But the problem is that when we have dogs that fall into hyperarousal, a lot of times those leash walks are working against us because the dog is taking in so much input that it doesn't know what to do with. So I want to eliminate or reduce leash walks as much as I can. I want to use confinement or a leash to prevent jumping or physical contact during stimulating situations in the home. So if somebody is coming in the door or kids are playing in the house and the dog finds that particularly stimulating, I want to make sure that I'm trying to avoid opportunities for the dog to over-arouse and make mistakes. I'll eliminate or reduce play temporarily as well. And then I'm making sure that they're getting enough sleep. Hyper-aroused dogs tend to be hypervigilant. They are constantly aware of everything that's going on in their surroundings. So often they will sort of pass out on the floor. I make it akin to sort of laying down on my couch and getting a nap. Yes, I'm sleeping, but I'm not getting great sleep. I definitely want to make sure that they're having some quiet, alone time in which they can get some good sleep. So management and enrichment. Talk about enrichment first. Simple enrichment tools are things like puzzle toys and feeders. They can range from very complicated to super easy. I found that almost everybody has a Kong in their house. Some people just don't know how to use it. That is the simplest and easiest enrichment tool that you will find, and it can really help our dogs. I like to teach tricks as an enrichment. Those tricks at this stage should be pretty low arousal. So I'm teaching something like a giving paw or head down or an army crawl on the ground, things that sort of keep our dogs focused on us and sort of sticky to the ground. And lastly, scent games. Whether you are putting food in a box and hiding it and having them find it, or tossing treats in the grass and telling them to go find the treats to eat it, scent games are amazing for changing sort of their brain chemistry and getting them to think in a different way. So, and there's tons of resources on scent games and how to do them. So managing in the moment. So even though we try to set up for success by preventing the behavior, accidents do happen. So what are the keys to successful management? Knowing what your dog looks like when it arouses, right? There are, we just listed some of the things that dogs look like when they arouse, but every dog is different in terms of how they arouse. So that's really important, knowing your dog. Comfortability, confining, or crating on onset. I want to be able to identify what arousal looks like, and so I can help my dog avoid continuing to arouse and be able to cut the behavior off before it really starts manifesting. Using the leash to manage, improving your defensive leash handling skills. I'll talk a little bit about defensive leash handling skills, but there are some great webinars. Michael Shikashio and Trish McMillan, Sue Sternberg have some great information about defensive leash handling skills that I would definitely check out. And lastly, establish an increasing responsiveness to cues. I when dogs are so aroused that they can't listen to cues. I hear it all the time from clients. He knows how to sit, but when he sees a trigger, it's like he can't even hear me. And yes, that is correct. He can't. All of his body chemistry is telling your dog that they have to really focus on that trigger, and they almost can't even hear you. So what I want to do is make cues more reliable to our dogs, more rewarding to our dogs, so that they can begin to respond to them when we have that early onset of arousal. So leash skills. Good leash skills are important when you have a dog that arouses on leash, whether it's towards you or towards another stimulus. Leashes are not just for walking. They are a important management tool. I often counsel clients to practice dealing with arousal scenarios by rehearsing nice leash skills with no stimulus. I want to make sure that the leash is not too slack, because I don't want them to have too much latitude to follow their emotions around a stimulus. If we hold the leash too tight, we're removing the escape option and adding frustration. So I really want to be good. To be successful, I really need to be good at how to handle the leash. If I have a dog that is moving upwards, as you saw with that dog Panzer, she immediately redirected to her owner. She grabbed the leash. I will practice moving the leash away or put under my foot, depending on the dog and how they arouse. And some helpful leash management exercises, which again, I'm practicing in my house, I'm practicing outside, are U-turns, treat scatters in the direction that I want the dog to move away from the trigger, and then teaching you some yielding to pressure. I talked about the leash being too tight, that it removes that escape option. They feel everything that every movement that we make with the leash, they feel. And what they do is they learn how to ignore it. I want to turn the leash from a tether to a steering wheel. So if I start to move with the leash, they actually feel like it is rewarding to move with me and move into the pressure on the leash. It's a really helpful tool when we have a dog that is beginning to arouse on the leash, so I can move away. So I talked about increasing responsiveness to cues. Increasing responsiveness to cues helps with managing outcomes. I want to make sure that that dog has a little opportunity to arouse in the face of a trigger, right? Foundational training help with that. It forms the basis for some alternative behaviors that I want to see the dog doing, whether I'm asking for them or they're offering it. And some of these foundational skills actually turn into coping mechanisms, so that if the dog doesn't know what to do in a given instance, it has a coping skill in which it can perform, and that makes it more comfortable. At the end of the day, getting dogs working helps to prevent and dilute escalation. If you think about what we looked at when we talked about that spectrum, going from emotional to rational, rehearsing behavior makes it stronger, right? Behaviors that are rewarded increase. Rehearsing thoughtful behavior actually makes reactivity more difficult for the dog. It embeds their needle more on the rational side. And so when they see a trigger, it might move, but it's a lot harder to get that needle to move into the emotional side. Some foundational behaviors include sit, leave it, go to mat, and hand targeting. So here's a video of a client dog. This is Zoe. Zoe is a 5-year-old female Labrador who has been jumping up and placing her mouth on strangers at this door for most of her life. They've had her since she was 8 weeks old. There's been no mitigation of a response, so she has been rehearsing it this whole time. She also rehearses the behaviors on people that she likes, just a little bit more muted. So one of the behaviors that we worked on at the door was a default sit. You may also hear me ask for a backup, which we were working on as well. One of the things that you will see in this video is that she is still stressed, right? She is still aroused. What I want is that she's able to be thoughtful, she's able to work, and she's able to offer me those alternative behaviors. So let's go ahead and see Zoe. Hopefully. I'm okay with barking at the door as long as it's rational. I'm tossing treats to her because her taking of treats is so hard on your hands that you really need some distance. We'll work on that as well. So you could see that she was still, her body was still pretty stiff as she was moving, as she was sitting, she was moving backwards. Her eyes were pretty round. She was panting. It was a fall day. It was not hot. The air conditioning was on in the house. She hadn't been outside. So those are all stress responses in context. Okay. Here is Liesel. Liesel is an older female mixed dog. She had a couple instances with biting strangers. In this exercise, we are using a known and liked person to practice multiple management behaviors. These are amazing and excellent clients that really work hard with their dog. Again, in this video, you will notice that she's still displaying arousal behaviors, but she's able to think and apply what she's learning. So we're working on rehearsing that good behavior before we start behavior modification. What an action. Stay. Well, hello. Do well. Yeah. Everybody's coming home and pulling to drive. What a good girl. Yeah, say hi. So you can see that in the video, her tail's up, her ears are forward, her body is still kind of stiff. She's very vigilant to the door. And even after she does the hand target, she turns towards the door as there an additional act of vigilance. But what I'm really looking for in this moment is not a complete change of behavior. I'm looking for her being able to apply the behaviors that we've been working on with a known and liked variable so that she's successful. So then we work on that fourth piece, that behavior, or that third piece, that behavior modification piece. So by behavior modification, I'm looking them to start choosing better behavior. First, because they feel better about the stimulus. And secondly, because they develop coping skills to deal with the stimulus. In that, I want to teach them that relaxing and being calm around a stimulus is rewarding for them, whatever that rewarding may be. And I just kind of listed a couple exercises or things that I work on when we're working on these. Sometimes it depends on the dog, but in general, there's a do nothing exercise and some mat work, which we'll look at videos of. I'll also use a reward and retreat, which you'll see a little bit later. And I don't have any videos of them, but I use behavior adjustment training by Grisha Stewart and constructional aggressive treatment by Kelly Snyder quite a bit as well. In that, we're teaching the dog that calm behavior creates the consequence that they want, which is distance from the trigger. It's really about figuring out what's rewarding for the dog that you can deliver that rewards that calm behavior versus continual arousement. So the do nothing exercise, this is an example of Sue Sternberg's do nothing exercise. In the resources, there's actually a link to her doing the exercise. And in this, the dog is learning how to relax on the mat and finding that relaxing is rewarding. So we'll go ahead and play the video. So that's my daughter and my dog, Zora. So she sits down in the chair. Zora doesn't know what's going on, checking in with me. When she relaxes on the mat, my daughter reaches out and pets her. Yes, she's petting her on the head. Zora doesn't mind that. She's not petting her when that little foot kicks out, because that's actually a demand behavior that Zora displays. So what she's looking for is sort of that lowering of the head, a little bit more relaxation out of the head before she steps in to reward again. Notice we're not using food in this exercise. I will do a variation of this exercise using a clicker and food, particularly when you have a dog that is aroused by human touch. So any petting actually makes the dog move upwards and mouth you, has a tendency to jump up. And I will have them behind a baby gate, or in the case of Panzer, that the first Rottweiler that I showed, we actually started off doing nothing, clicking and treating in her crate, because she was just so explosive and had rehearsed those arousal behaviors so often that we really needed to start off with confinement that she liked and appreciated. She didn't mind her crate. She liked her crate. So being able to reward those sort of do nothing and calm behaviors in her crate, and then we could sort of go and build from there. So in this next video is Hank. Hank is a young Labrador purchased from a breeder who specializes in hunting dogs, not hunting dogs. These owners do not hunt. They are a young family with children who have many, many activities. They were looking for a dog that they could take on walks and take to sporting events that would chill out while the kids were playing softball. And Hank is not that dog. They live in a busy suburban neighborhood on a corner lot. Even though their lot is a good size, it's actually bordered on both sides that are not on the streets by houses. So Hank has 360 degrees of input all at any time. I was contacted because Hank has demonstrated destruction in both that yard and the house, arouses on leash towards people, humps his owners, is reactive to people, dogs, cars, and bicycles, and also has a history of leash grabbing. You'll notice that we're working outside. It was during COVID, so I was exclusively working with him outside. Outside plus a stranger was a lot of input for Hank. We started working with sessions of a 30-minute duration in which the actual work was only 15 minutes. And during that 15 minutes, we were doing some water breaks and some sniffing breaks where I was tossing the treats in the grass to get him doing something else. So training was always short and sweet at the beginning, and we were able to build up his resilience, and tolerance, and be able to work for the full hour or 50 minutes. So we had established a go-to-mat queue as management for the owners. Now what we're doing is that I want him to start choosing the mat when there's no attention on him versus his preferred behavior, which was to jump up, grab things, grab your clothes, and basically just start creating mayhem. So there is no sound on this video. He's panting, not because he is stressed, but because it is warm outside and we've been working for a little while. I'm sitting in the chair in the direction in which he's looking. I have a clicker in my hand, but my food is on the table. He's aware that I have food. And all I'm doing, I'm completely ignoring him and I'm waiting for him to do exactly that. I am clicking and reaching in and treating. I'm treating with multiple treats because of the slats on the ground. They tend to fall through. So I'm really looking for him to make a better choice, right? And one that is actually promoting his relaxation. So in behavior modification, we really want to create opportunities and reward good choices. So setting up opportunities for demonstration of good behaviors. I want them to be successful. I want to click and treat behaviors that I want to see more of. I can use creating distance from the trigger as a reward and a reset, as how it happens in bat and cat. We have to tell them that we find calm behavior highly rewardable, because dogs that have hyperarousal do not find calm behavior highly rewardable. They don't often know what calm behavior is, because even when they are what we would consider to be calmer, they still have that hyperarousal right in their back pocket. We want to help them make good choices and use data to inform moving forward. So what I want to do is always set the dog, as I said, set the dog up for success. I want, if we're working with a trigger outside or a trigger at the door, I want to make sure that we are working in a place in which the dog is more than comfortable at the beginning, and then we're increasing that criteria slowly. Failure sometimes happens. Failure is information in which to change your approach. I don't want to see a dog failing over and over again, because it's just rehearsing that bad behavior and not really getting me what I want at the end of the day, which is a happier dog. So here is Miss Penny. Miss Penny is an 8-month-old dachshund. She lives in a busy townhome community. She's lived there her entire life. She previously spent her days barking out the window at any and all passerby. At our first meeting, I always do first meetings outside. If it is a dog that has had a series or a history of aggression, I will, and it's raining, I'll actually reschedule it. I want to meet a dog outside for safety, but also so that I don't have the dog rehearsing the behavior at the beginning of the session. When they brought her out for our initial session, she immediately launched out the door and was barking before she even hit the first step or saw that there was anything outside to bark at. Now, she is a dachshund, but it with a propensity towards barking, but all of that rehearsal was really leading her to just sort of let the world know that she was not tolerable of anything that was potentially going to go on. If there were visitors in her home, she would charge them and try to bite their ankles. If they got her calmed down, if any of those strangers would move in the slightest, she would charge them and try to bite at their ankles as well. At this time in her training, we've worked on management and have begun behavior modification. So she has a suite of behaviors under her belt, including going to the mat. She started choosing going to her mat. We have started working on some low-level triggers in the house, people that she knows and are aware of. Her social circle is incredibly small. So we've started doing some work on that in the house, and she's been successful enough that I wanted to start working outside on her reactivity to the environment. In this video, we're keeping the leash soft, and we are clicking and treating for calm behavior. All I'm looking for in this case is that her body is not showing signs of arousal. She knows I'm across the street. She is aware that I'm across the street, and and you'll see her look directly at me. I want her owner clicking and treating because I know that she's aware of me. I want her owner clicking and treating for any behaviors that we want to see, which can be ignoring me. She is aware of the stimulus across the street. So let's watch Penny.
Take it.
So when she moves forward and she looks at me, she's doing so with like her tail is kept at mid back or lower. It's not tucked. Even when she moves her ears forward in interest, they're moving back to the mid of her head. Sorry about the camera work there. Not great.
There. Great timing on that click.
So a dog just making really great choices in the face of a trigger. So the fifth piece I'm working on is sort of a focus on impulse control. Like I said earlier, we're working on impulse control the whole time. We're adding in those weights and leave-its early on, but I tend to work a little bit, I tend to add specific exercises at the end to start really sort of working directly on more impulse control. Some examples of that are the chill out game or red light, green light. I'm playing with the dog at a sort of low arousal level, stopping. I'll take the toy away or drop the toy. What I'm looking for is maybe not a specific behavior. Maybe I'm just looking for a calm countenance and not jumping up. I'll then use the toy again as a reward. Dee Ganley actually has a great write-up of this chill out game that I linked in the resources. Leslie McDevitt's Control Unleashed exercises. There are 3 books about where Leslie has sort of devised pattern games. We talked earlier about how predictability is really important in our dogs having more self-control, and pattern games are a great way to help them learn that. Karen Overall Square Breathing and Relaxation Protocol. Square breathing is teaching a dog how to literally take a breath, just like we do in yoga, or if we're stressed, we hit our little Apple Watches with our breathing app. Maybe I'm speaking for personal experiences, but square breathing really helps them sort of learn how to take a 4 square breath. Relaxation protocol, when we're doing some of that mat work and working with trying to get them to understand relaxation on the mat, it's actually a great guideline for owners to be able to practice low level arousing activities, stand up, clap, turn around, which the dog can learn how to sort of work through. And it's broken up by days. Some clients that I start with when they're working on relaxation protocol, I'm looking at like, can they do a couple, right, of the exercises through that's really meant to be worked on in the day. Practicing and raising criteria on cues. Like I said, I added in wait and leave it probably pretty early on. I want to make it a little bit more difficult. Always making sure that they remain successful, but make it a little bit more challenging with the leave-its and the weights. I will practice this for forever with a dog that is highly aroused or has a history of high arousal, I should say. And this is where I'm adding play back in. If you remember our slide on prevention, I wanted to take away play. When we add play back in, I'm adding structure to play. Meaning I want to teach a drop it. I want to teach a take it. When we're playing, I want to be able to end the game if I start to see too much over arousal or too much focus, and institute some real breaks. I think a lot of times we start to like throw that ball for a dog and we're continuing to go and continuing to go. And for many dogs, that's okay. For dogs that have a history of hyperarousal, I really want to make sure that I'm instilling the need to take breaks. When I look at arousal, often in dogs that have hyperarousal, it looks like a rocket ship, right? We just start and we just take off. What I want arousal in something like play to look like, or in greetings at the door, is more like a mountain range, right? So we're starting here and we're starting at a low level. Our arousal comes up, but then it comes back down. And that's how I want play to look like as well. That we're really getting some breaks and relaxation in after that more arousing period. So then we start to apply it. This is where I'm adding walks back in. At first, they should be short, sweet, and thoughtful. What do I mean by thoughtful? I want clients to be looking at if their dog is going to be able to be successful and by what method do they need to employ. Meaning, maybe there are triggers that my dog has a much harder time with not getting hyper aroused. So in that case, what I want to do is maybe still avoid, still prevent, because they're not ready to work with that trigger, or we're working with that trigger, but at a greater distance, right? There are times where I'm training through things. There are times, but I also want clients to realize when there are times to not train through them. Thanksgiving, not a time to train your reactive dog. But looking at opportunities and seeing if we can steal in little bits of training, 5 repetitions, 10 repetitions, so that the dog is starting to experience sort of that real life and applying their knowledge at a low stimulus level. And then when they can sort of trust the dog to employ what we've been working on and really start to give us the behaviors that we find desirable and that they've actually found is a better way of living. I'm still using a high rate of reinforcement, particularly if the stimulus is a little bit more difficult. And again, I'm always setting up for success. I want to make sure that my dog is always as successful as I can make them, particularly when we live in a busy urban or suburban environment. So lastly, here are some resources. I have 2 little slides of resources of trainers and scientists that I've either taken information to help inform the presentation or just informs my training. And I know that Deborah said that she's gonna upload this to YouTube. So this will all be here. And at that point, I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay, we have some questions for you. One person wants to know, how does frustration fit into hyperarousal?
Great question. When we have a dog that is arousing, frustration can absolutely help push it towards or over the edge. You see it a lot at gates, at doors. My dog that I mentioned at the beginning had landed bites at doorways because he was frustrated that something was on the other side of that door. Leashes, when we're making that leash tight. And so working around those barriers is particularly important. That mat exercise that I did with Liesel, part of that is to be able to get away from the door and teaching the dog that it is rewarding to move away from the door. The client used a thank you. I would use that's in place of a leave it to get the dog moving away, to be able to reduce the arousal and that frustration. Because absolutely, it will make arousal more likely and more severe, or that hyperarousal. And often that's when you have a nice dog or you have a dog that ends up making mistakes because it can't move forward.
That actually reminds me, one of the questions that I used to hear a lot with reactive dogs is, how can you tell if the dog is frustrated because they can't get to the other dog versus acting aggressively because they want the other dog to stay away?
Great question. I get this a lot. My clients are at our first session, my clients will often say, like, well, I don't know if they want to meet, or I don't know if they, and sometimes we do meetings and sometimes it goes well. In that case, I'll usually do an assessment with my my fake dog. What I'm looking for, or if I'm using a real dog, I'm using a dog that is kind of a softball and is very dog savvy. What I'm looking for is that the body language, is the dog, is my reactive dog, is are they completely oriented towards that dog that they want to meet? Are they able to listen to me? Are they are they showing any sort of conciliatory or nice behaviors? At the end of the day, even if a dog is friendly, and they're showing that frustration on a leash, I don't want to run up and allow the greeting anyway, because it's just practicing. It's practicing an aroused behavior in which there's not a lot of thought. Because if they were thinking, they would know to employ their dog's social mores, right? So if we think about how humans react, if you didn't know me and I just ran up to you on the street screaming and waving my hands, it doesn't matter how nice I am. At the end of the day, you're going to be put off and maybe react to me because my approach to you was so overwhelming. So either way, it's a display of hyperarousal. And I really want to make sure that I'm seeing nicer, calmer, more conciliatory, more sociable behaviors out of a dog before I'm moving forward with a friendly dog, to then be able to allow a greeting.
Okay. You had mentioned head halters, and Karen wants to know if they're even safe for a 12 to 14 pound dog. She said that her Yorkie hates it. And I had heard that there were some safety issues with head halters.
I think that part of the challenge that we have with head halters is that they have to be, clients have to be taught how to use them. That I only use them for dogs that are definitely sort of outweighing their owner. And I do a lot of work around how to condition them and how to use them appropriately. Yet you have your dog's head in your hands. I think when you have a collar, one of the things that I was discussing with my vet is that even when you have a dog on a regular collar, you're pulling on it and the dog's pulling on it. They see through X-rays or CT scans that they end up with damage to their neck. So what we're looking for is just being able to use, regardless of that tool, a head halter, a harness, or a martingale collar or a buckle collar. What I'm just trying to do is make sure that we can get enough sort of help the owner get enough sort of leverage over the dog, but always using it in an appropriate way. I think I think that the danger with head halters is when people buy them because they know that they think it will create leverage over their dog, but they're not using it appropriately. But that's true for almost any of our tools.
Okay. You had also mentioned not walking dogs that have some of these issues while the issue is being worked on. And Kelly wanted to know, what if you have no yard and must walk a dog on a leash?
Great question. So, one, I want to increase its mental stimulation inside the house. Absolutely. Two, if I am taking it on walks, I'm making sure that those walks are at off times. So I'm walking it at 5 a.m. Before there's a ton of stimulation on the street. And I'm making walks short and sweet. I'm with a high rate of reinforcement. So I haven't fed breakfast yet, and I'm going out at 5 a.m. to walk my dog. I'm making sure that that's where they're getting a lot of their calories. And the food, the treat that I'm giving them has to be meaningful enough that they are paying attention to me and not the outside environment. I will also start doing some exercises before I even hit the pavement. So those foundational exercises that I talked about, weights, leave-its, I'm trying to employ a lot of those. I want the dog working before it even hits the ground. So it's 5 a.m. My treat bag is loaded with chicken or hot dogs or something awesome. That's where the dog's going to get most of its caloric content for the breakfast. I maybe asking for some sits and some downs. I'm doing a wait at the door before I go out. And then the whole time we're staying connected, which means I'm not looking at my phone, worrying about the meetings that I have. I am aware of what my dog is doing, and I'm employing a high rate of reinforcement as we're moving along.
Can you also take shorter walks if you are giving your dog mental stimulation in other ways?
Yeah, I think that we tend to think about walks as like exercise for our dogs, but they're actually moderating their gait to match ours. So they're not really getting like good cardiac exercise unless we're like biking or skijoring with them. So really walks are tiring for our dogs because of the mental enrichment. So a dog that doesn't have hyperarousal, they're still getting tired out because they are smelling past dogs and food and all these things that have gone on in the environment. And a hyper aroused dog is actually should be even more tired, but it tends to just make them more aroused. So I'm doing a lot shorter walks, probably more frequently, feeding any meal is coming out of a puzzle toy. So they're constantly working for their food. That is one thing that I'm glad you asked this question, because it is one thing that I did not mention in the presentation. I don't feed out of a food bowl. My dog, when we got my border collie, they were just letting her graze. She's from rescue, and they were like, she doesn't really eat all at once. We let her graze, and she's pretty good at controlling her calories. And I immediately started working out of a slow feeder. We increase the importantness of her food so that she's actually eating on a schedule, so I can have a little bit more control over the resources. So that means that if I want to be able to work with her, I'm not worried that whether or not she's been grazing on and off all day, but that I know how much of a resource the food that I'm presenting to her is.
I also want to mention, especially for those of you watching on video, that we just put out a newsletter on awareness walks. And if you have a yard and no fence, for example, there is a lot you can do with a dog on a leash. And that's what awareness walks are all about. So if you go to our homepage and you look at previous newsletters, it'll be the last one that just went out. Okay. Is it necessary to reduce play if the dog doesn't get over aroused when playing?
Yes, I want to make sure that they're actually not getting over aroused when they're playing. So if your dog is showing a hyper arousal only with one specific trigger, but in the house you can play, or in the yard you can play with a toy, and they're respectful, meaning they will drop it on cue. And when you go to grab it, they don't rush towards you and try to grab it themselves and sort of play some keep away. As long as I can institute some play with that is nice and not hyper aroused, then absolutely. It's a great question, because it's the challenge of doing a presentation like this is that it's sort of a big picture, but every dog is different, every owner is different, and every environment is different. And so, even though I sort of presented it as a recipe, it's, I really want to get to know the dog. I really want to get to know the owner, learn about the environment, so that we can sort of use these pieces to sort of craft the best success. And what might be useful for one dog is not useful for another.
You had also mentioned getting good sleep, and there's a question about whether you're concerned that dogs are getting good enough sleep during the day in addition to at night. In other words, does she need to make sure that the dog is getting good naps during the day?
Yes, in the fact of if they live in a busy neighborhood. That Penny that I showed the dachshund, she would lay on the back of the couch, actually backed up to the windows, and she would lay down on the couch all day, yeah. Except for it afforded her a view of the action going on outside. And so she was laying down, but she was actually in a state of hyperarousal because she was reacting to everything that she saw. She just was laying down while she was doing it. So that's particularly important for young dogs and puppies. They tend to get to a point in which they don't think that they should take naps anymore. And there's a lot more, they're more easily stimulated, I should say.
Did you mention window film as an option?
I did not. And I love that. Window film, moving anything that sort of helps them see out of the window. So sort of creating a barrier. I have clients, I love that you brought that up, because I have clients that have a dog with arousal, and it really, that window film or it really helps reduce their opportunities for practicing.
And in case you don't know what we're talking about, you can buy window film at Home Depot or Lowe's. You can see out, but your dog can't because of the difference in our eyes. And a lot of these, you can't really even see from the outside. And they let light in, unlike just closing the drapes or closing the blinds. So it's a really good way to keep your dog from spending all day looking out the window and barking at dogs and people and anything else that goes by. So keep that in mind. Let's see. What did comfortably in the crate at onset mean?
So what I want to be able to do, if you think about the video with Liesel, the dog that the friend rang the doorbell and she told the dog thank you and sent it to its mat, that's a management behavior. It's as I mentioned, the dog was still sort of stressed during that, or aroused, I should say. But she was able to cut the behavior off of barking and sort of obsessing at the door and move away. I want to be able to do that for the dog that is not safe, or in situations in which they're not safe, or the dog is likely to aggress. I want to be able to move the dog away from the door and have some sort of confinement in place. And what that looks like is dependent on the person and the dog and the environment. At my house with my mountain cur, when there was a knock at the door, I would cue to leave it. And then the next cue was upstairs, which meant to run upstairs and into our bedroom, in which I could close and lock the door. Then the decision is mine and not his on how the rest of the interaction unfolds or sometimes doesn't unfold. I have a client that has a baby that has like her door. There's a little space outside of her door that's baby gated off. So she can answer the door and the dogs are still in the living room, but they don't have access to the door. And then that helps her with decision making in terms of, is it just that she needs to answer the door and the dogs can hang out in the living room but not have access to that visitor? Or can they move off? Or do they need to be moved into another room? The crate is the same. So I want a dog that if they are comfortable being crated, that we can maybe use the crate as a confinement. I'm also happy with baby gates or rooms or kind of whatever works for that situation. I just want to make sure that everybody stays, that everyone in the equation stays safe and dogs aren't able to make bad decisions.
And if you know that you're expecting company, don't wait for your dog to go crazy and then separate your dog. Be a little bit proactive.
Absolutely.
That'll, that'll help. In your experience, does neutering reduce arousal?
I think that studies are sort of all over the place on they're sort of over the place. It does reduce testosterone, but I think that that's something that's still being studied. And again, that's my not a scientist, but I have not personally seen it from my experience to help with arousal. I think oftentimes when we're looking at it as a solution, the dog has had the opportunity to practice arousal so often that we're fighting against a history of successful behaviors.
You had also mentioned pattern games, and I wanted people to know that we have a webinar on pattern games coming up on August 5th. We also have a video from a previous webinar on our YouTube channel on scent games, which you also had mentioned. How do you interrupt displaced aggression either to me or another dog in the home?
First, I'm trying to prevent it as much as possible. If it is happening because you have two dogs that don't like each other in the home, I'm doing a lot of that prevention and management, meaning that I have baby gates in place. Dogs often have leashes. And I'm doing a lot of very serious behavior modification work with big breaks. So when we talk about the challenge with dogs in our home, is that when they're aggressing in our home, is that they are constantly getting input from each other and that we are not playing a role of. I had two dogs that did not like each other, that we were able to work together successfully, but they were constantly communicating to each other how much they did not like each other. And I had to play a role in sort of interrupting and constantly redirecting that at that sort of management level. If it's on a leash, I am practicing a lot of really amazing leash handling skills to protect myself. And I am not walking, and I'm not walking the dogs together. so that they rehearse that behavior. I want to be able to practice keeping arousal down as much as possible. If I am working with a stimulus, I want to try to control that trigger as much as possible as well. So, which can be very challenging when we're working in a busy urban or suburban environment. And that trigger sort of just abounds or can pop out of any house at any time. But if it's on the leash, I also want to start from the very beginning, working before we even, again, hit the ground. I want to start working in the house because I want the dog in more rational thinking instead of like that excitement. So when we have a dog that that either reacts or redirects on the leash outside, if we do not do that work inside of the house before we hit the ground, we're going outside with a super excited dog, right? They're on a leash, they're going on a walk. It's really awesome. And so even though all of the display has all been really happy and excited, we've ticked up their arousal. So it doesn't matter that it's happy arousal. It makes it more likely for them to sort of spill up into unhappy arousal.
All right, here's a question I love, because if I see a snake, I'm going to be hyper aroused and you would not be able to get me down. So how can we lower our dog's hyper arousal when he sees a deer, a snake, or a neighboring dog?
So different sort of different qualifications. A deer would fall more into prey territory. I tend to work a lot of when we look at prey, things that happen in. I'm looking at the dog's output to determine what my input is. In general, and again, this is not true for every single dog human combination. In general, when I'm looking at something like prey drive, so a dog interested in deer or squirrels, foxes, there's a lot of arousal, but it's happening in a more concentrated way, right? So I'm working a lot at like sort of increasing their fluency on responding to cues, trying to cut off the behavior as it starts. Prey drive, that concept of sort of prey is a behavior cascade. So in which all the following behaviors are sort of interlinked. So I really want to sort of step in and I think we're a little bit more successful on leash, practicing, doing a lot of like setup and practice. Reactivity to other dogs is usually driven by, usually not always, but usually driven by some sort of like stress that they feel, often by fear or just sort of the uncomfortability of the unknown of that dog. And that's where I'm doing a lot of work around increasing their fluency, but then a huge behavior modification piece of getting them to understand that being calm is important. Usually something like a snake, it's usually a fear response, right? Which is all out, like sort of that over arousal of the strange and the unknown. What I want to do is, Deborah's description of her response to a snake is apt. We expect that high arousal with something that is strange or that we find fear in. Totally normal. You should not ask me an algebraic equation if I'm being mugged, right? I should feel fear. I should feel arousal. That arousal is actually there to save my life. But what our body chemistry is designed to do is that I don't stay in that state of fear, right? If Deborah sees a snake and she starts screaming and dancing on a chair, I don't expect to walk in the office and see her dancing on a chair, screaming 2 days later, because our bodies aren't designed to do that. So what I want is that we can have that high arousal in that moment because it is for safety, but that the dog is able to calm down and come back. And we can help them do that by really increasing a lot of the responsiveness to cues and responsiveness on the leash as well.
Hey, I
Sorry,
hate
I
to
know that was
say
a
it,
lot of
but I was even afraid of a dead snake. I knew it was dead, but it just freaked me out that it was there. Okay. What about fence fighting? If a neighborhood dog is, on the other side of a fence, even if both are fenced in, does fence fighting cause more aggression because that's what my neighbor thinks? Or, and I mean, I know it would cause arousal, but is that?
It's a great question, because this is where you can have dogs that arouse and get excited, but they don't tip over into aggression, right? Or they don't tip into aggression in certain instances. So one of the questions earlier was about a dog that redirected. My dog that would land bites on other people at arousal, I could grab his collar at the time of arousal and he would completely relax, right? So there was clearly some sort of thinking, or his arousal was in a specific context. Fence fighting for a dog that is going to, or has a predilection for tipping into aggression. Yes, it can absolutely, it's a rehearsal of arousal behaviors. If you, and it can sort of lead to, it will lead to more arousal behaviors. Where the terminus is of that arousal behavior, we don't know, unless we know the history of the dog, or the dog has had an aggressive history before. And so what I want to do with fence fighting, if it's fence fighting against my own fence, it's my dog in the yard, absolutely, I want to make sure to stop it. Because I whether it's talking to the neighbor and making sure that dogs are only going out at certain times at first, getting your neighbor to go out with their dog on a leash and doing a lot of reinforcement, just even some basic counter conditioning with both dogs in there, doing a lot of recall work away from the fence without that trigger present. So I really want the dog's skills to increase if it's happening in my own yard, and feel better about the fact that that other dog is there. I will, if I'm working on a reactive dog who is reacting to dogs behind their own fences on neighborhoods, I will often use some behavior adjustment training that I talked about, or the clicking for calm behavior. I actually really like using dogs behind fences, because it's a way, because the client dog actually already knows that the dog is there. 9 times out of 10, when we think that our dog doesn't know something or hasn't seen it, they're already aware of the stimulus. They've just decided how they're going to deal with it, either acknowledge it, arouse, or totally dispense with it. So I will actually use some of the dogs behind fences as things to work with. But yeah, if it's happening in my own house, I definitely want to step in and get that behavior changed.
My neighbor and I keep in touch with each other. I know her work hours, so my dogs won't be out the same time as her dog before she leaves for work. If there's something else coming up, like she's, I don't know, has to have her dog out for some reason, she'll text us. And if we need to have our dog out specifically, we'll text her. Or if we're going out for the night, we'll text and say, we're leaving the house, probably won't be back until 9 p.m., which just means don't worry about our dogs. They're inside, do whatever you want. And that's been super helpful. Of course, you have to have a good neighbor, but it's good for us. It's good for her. It's a win-win. Okay, I love this question because this comes up in other contexts. Robert has a border collie that has one issue, the herding instinct. It makes his arousal go up when a car approaches, and then it's followed by an intense diligence to find another car. Would taking him to sheep herding to redirect his instinct help? And how can I interrupt the cue of an approaching car when all the obedience training fails?
Oh, great question. So when we're looking at that arousal in the face of in something like a car, I tend not to attribute that arousal to their breed instincts, because when you look at a border collie, so I would definitely encourage taking a sheepdog herding class. I think it'd be really enriching for your border collie and for you. But when you watch a dog that's actually performing a behavior that it is genetically designed and trained to do, you see, even though they're incredibly intense and they do have a level of arousal, that arousal is focused, right? We have arousal all the time where we are super focused, and it actually helps us get through things. And so it's necessary. When it is in that way of sort of reacting to a passing car, generally I'm looking at is that they find that the noise, the movement of that car to be stressful in some way. And so they're reacting to it. So I think that increasing your dog's enrichment would help, but it's not a panacea for cars. What we're usually doing with something like a car is that I want to increase the dog's responsiveness to cues. So, which I'm working on before I even sort of hit the road. And then I'm trying to figure out a place in which I can do setups. So I had a client who's had the same issue with her dog, and she was trying to work on it before we met. She was trying to work on it by taking her dog to a busy street with lots of cars, because it was giving her she thought it was giving it lots of opportunities to practice the behavior, practice rewarding her dog. The problem was that the dog was becoming hyper aroused and had so much input that all it was doing was reacting, and was no longer capable of listening or having rational thought. So we actually started, I wanted to make sure that the dog was comfortable with cars that were not moving. And then we ended up going to a cul-de-sac at a busy-ish time, and figured out a place to sort of work where we could create distance from cars moving, and all they're doing is sort of moving into their parking slots and out of their slots. So the movement is not fast, and it wasn't, and we could create an appropriate distance. So, and then we're working on some classical conditioning of car means food and is awesome, no behavior required. And in that case, usually I'm also working on some Grisha Stewart's behavior adjustment training. Trigger actually means that moving away from the trigger is the reward. And it's usually followed up by a food bonus reward. But yeah, it's really, in that case, it's controlling, it's getting your dog in a rational state of mind, and then being able to set them up for success when you're practicing some counter conditioning and other alternative behavior modification methods.
That would be a great long-term approach. I guess what I'm wondering is if you find yourself in that situation, the car is coming, can you distract, move away, distract the dog, things like that?
Yeah. So, great question. I actually one of the things that we talked about was scent games. And the example that I gave was you could even do like a simple find it in the grass, toss some food, dog's nose goes down, they sniff it out and eat it. I will actually train that as a cue. If I have no other options in front of me and I need to get the dog distracted, I will do a find it. Find it becomes a cue in which the dog's nose goes to the ground, whether you have tossed food or not. So I'm doing a lot of that. I also want, when I talked about leash handling and that leash pressure, I want a dog to move at my pace if a trigger is present and not their pace. And what I mean by that is that I've absolutely been in situations with my mountain cur where I was turning and running. He doesn't feel the need to turn and run in that moment because he just wants to tell off that dog or that person and build his arousal. So one of the things that we worked on was I'm doing a U-turn and I'm turning and going in the opposite direction. And it is rewarding for you to run alongside me. Even if the dog doesn't understand why you're turning and going, I want that U-turn. So working on a U-turn, working on find it. In some cases, I'll do a move off and a front sit with their back to the trigger, and I'll come down on the leash so that the leash is short but slack, so that we actually reduce the dog's ability to lunge.
And it sounds like it's a chase game, which is always fun. Can you speak on dogs that get hyper aroused, barking and stopping during walks, even when no other dogs or humans are around? What skill is lacking there? That does very individual.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when dogs are stopping, walking on leash, and they're displaying, especially if they're displaying a certain level of hypervigilance, they are communicating to us, or even if they're not displaying that level of hypervigilance, they're communicating to us that their brain is full. They have, and they are making a good choice by stopping, because I think that it is their way of telling us that they have had enough input. So in that case, usually because we have to remember that their senses are so much better than ours, that they are noticing so many more things in the environment, even that we don't notice. And even when we do notice them, they're noticing so much, their information that they're taking in is so much more detailed than what we're taking in. So often when they get overstimulated, a dog that is actually displaying nice behavior will stop. And at that point, I want to just turn around and sort of go home. Often my clients will say that, when they describe that dog, they'll say they don't want to move forward, but when we turn around to go home, they're really happy to go home. And I think that the dog is just to the point of over-arousal, but it's actually displaying a nice response to over-arousal. It's saying, I can't go any further.
This is just a comment to something you said earlier. Early in the morning, there's a ton of stimulation in the form of wildlife, deer, foxes, squirrels, etc. I tend to go for long walks because I thought it's good to tire her out. I guess the question is, does walking at our pace tire out a dog?
Not usually, because they're changing their gait to match ours. Usually, and obviously there's smaller dogs that have to walk a little bit faster to keep up with us. But they're changing their gait to match ours, and they're often not getting cardiac sort of exercise. When you see them panting, it's because it's hot, or because they are it's a sort of arousal response to the information. That doesn't mean that they're over aroused, but it does mean that they're sort of taking in a lot of information. And I find that shorter, if I don't have the ability to completely eliminate walks, or my dog, it's not appropriate to eliminate walks. Like I said, every dog is different. I want to make sure that those walks are short and meaningful, and ideally happen maybe a little bit more often. So they're really kind of, Deborah, I liked your definition of sort of awareness walks. I'll call them training walks or working walks, where I'm really looking for a walk to be a partnership with my dog. Like if I was going on a walk with my husband, we wouldn't just sort of be walking, doing our own thing. There's a connection that's there, and we're aware of sort of what each one is doing. If he stops to tie his shoe, I'm not like continuing to walk on. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's important during your walks to let your dog sometimes take the lead, let your dog sniff. It's sometimes people think they have to go fast and their dog has to go fast, and because that's physical exercise, but you're missing out on some mental enrichment that your dog wants and needs. So,
yeah, I think that that's an excellent point. I will tell you that our border collie does not have she has arousal, but she doesn't have the same sort of arousal problems as my other dogs. So when we go on walks to the parks and things like that, she can kind of do what she wants. My rule is just that I don't want my arm pulled off, right? Because it's enriching for her. She's smelling all these things. She's checking things out. But that's sort of where it's, we're sort of looking to see, like, is there a problem? That wasn't when we first got her. It wasn't, let's just take her out and start walking her through the park and let her do whatever she wants. I want to make sure that she's not having that arousal response. And if I'm part of that is that it's a conscious decision. When I'm telling my dog sniffing is enriching on a walk, but it's a conscious decision to say, like, this is what my dog is doing. I'm not walking my dog for 45 minutes, looking at my phone while my dog is taking in so much information that they don't know what to do with.
Holly wants to know, what is the relationship between anxiety and fear and arousal?
So fear is a normal feeling that we have. It is useful. There's a book by an author that I am blanking on the name, called The Gift of Fear. Fear is normal. And anxiety is the actual fear of the event without fear of the actual event that would cause the fear, right? So I should be fearful if my house is on fire, or if I smell smoke in my house. I should be fearful. Anxiety is sort of waiting for that other shoe to drop and looking at, right, and being sort of hyper vigilant about any smell that constantly happens in my house. Maybe that's a bad example, but what you see arousal in both. When you have arousal with fear, it's like the example with Deborah and the snake. There's a normal amount of arousal that says, "Oh, I need to save my life," and it doesn't matter sometimes whether that fear is rational or not. But I need to save my life. It is a response that is emotional, that is in that limbic emotional part of your brain that says, I need to act. When we have anxiety, that arousal stays high, and your body starts to produce those stress hormones, and they actually, and they don't decrease. So stress hormones like cortisol and the like, that are released by your adrenal glands, the whole point of them is that it's basically to get you through this fearful moment when you have somebody who has a dog that has anxiety. Those hormones, they tend to remain in a state of arousal, so their body is consistently producing those stress hormones. And so they're in a constant sort of state of anxiety, or when that anxiety when the context arises for them to feel anxiety.
Bruce came back to explain, and I think we got this anyway, that his comment about early morning walks had to do with the suggestion to go off hours. Sometimes you still can't avoid stimulating environments. However, I have a friend who puts his dog in the car, and in the morning before work hours, he goes to like a big office park and walks his dog around there so that they won't have as much stimulation. There won't be dogs and people, and, it'll be a calmer environment to walk his dog. Now, I realize not everyone has time to do that, but if you just keep in mind that idea, there are places that you can go, perhaps that you can even walk to, that are less stimulating than others. Okay, gotten through the questions, and I want to thank Jennifer and thank all of you for coming. All right, take care, everybody.
Thank you, Deborah.